This year, your ballot includes Initiative 2109, an effort to repeal the state's fledgling capital gains tax. Opposing campaigns agree the stakes are high with 2109, but disagree on why. The state capital gains tax was enacted in 2021 with the passage of Senate Bill 5096. It's a 7% tax on the sale or exchange of long-term assets like stocks, bonds, and business property that exceeds $250,000. $262,000 adjusted for inflation this year. It does not apply to real estate transactions. There are certain other exemptions set up for retirement accounts and qualifying small businesses. The state capital gains tax took effect in 2022, and the first payment was due in April of 2023. It brought in close to $800 million in year one and around $430 million in year two. The first $500 million from the tax goes to the Education Legacy Trust account set up for K-12 and preschool programs. When capital gains tax collections exceed $500 million in a year, the additional money goes to an account to fund school construction projects. In conjunction with the capital gains tax, in 2021, lawmakers approved the Fair Start for Kids Act, which set up a new funding stream for child care subsidies and access to early childhood education. That program is partly funded by the capital gains tax collections. The Office of Financial Management estimates that if Initiative 2109 passes and the capital gains tax is repealed, state tax revenue will shrink by $2.2 billion over 5 fiscal years.
Now, Initiative 2109 is on the ballot. It'll cut billions from education and childcare that so many families like mine rely on and can't afford to lose. All because the super wealthy don't want to pay what they owe.
But what they aren't telling you is that Washington State has had a budget surplus of $19 billion over the last 5 years.
The capital gains income tax is a pathway to broader taxation.
Up next, a 2109 supporter and an opponent of the initiative will join me on the set for a panel discussion. Stay with us. Joining you now, Initiative 2109 supporter Vijay Boyapati, a Seattle-based software engineer, and initiative opponent, Dr. Stephan Blanford, the executive director of the Children's Alliance. Thank you both for your time today. Vijay, I'd like to start with you, but immediately following you and your first response, I want to hear from you, and I'd like to get a sense about both of your backgrounds and your position on the issue and sort of how those two work together, or how one informs the other. So, Vijay, if you could, again, just a little bit about your background and also why you are supporting I-2109.
So firstly, thank you for the introduction, Mike, and I appreciate TVW having me here to talk about what I think is an incredibly important issue for the future of Washington's economy and the vibrancy of our economy. You can probably tell from my accent that I was born and raised in Australia, and I came here about a quarter of a century ago to do a PhD in computer science. I didn't do the PhD. I ended up at a small startup, and that startup was called Google. And together, the employees of Google helped create one of the most valuable services on earth that's used by billions of people every day. And in creating this service, we also created an enormous amount of wealth for employees. And like many employees in the tech sector, a lot of my compensation came in the form of stock. And actually, you know, a lot of tech employees take risk by doing this. They take a lower salary and they get stock in compensation. So when Google went public, I actually faced a very important question for my life, which is, would I stay in California and pay a very large state income tax on top of the federal capital gains tax, or would I go somewhere which didn't punish success? And I chose 18 years ago to come to Seattle. And I strongly believe that Seattle's tax policy is a very important reason, the primary reason that our tech sector here has flourished and why so many people have come here to start businesses in Washington. By creating a capital gains tax, we not only create a disincentive for people to come here, we create an incentive for people who do have large capital gains to leave. We've already seen the world's wealthiest person, Jeff Bezos, leave to Florida. And we're going to lose not just the investments he would make here, but the philanthropy that he would give to our community. And I'd like to think about the question of what would Seattle look like without Paul Allen? If Paul Allen had never come here, it would be a very different city. This is part of the reason, we'll talk about the other reasons, but this is part of the reason I think people should support 2109 and vote yes, so that Washington continues its long tradition of not punishing success, but welcoming America's and the world's best and brightest here to create vibrant companies, jobs, and the future of technology right here in Washington.
Okay, Dr. Blanford, if you could, again, your background and why you oppose I-2109.
Sure, and thank you also for the opportunity to speak on this issue. My name is Dr. Stephan Blanford. I'm the Executive Director of Children's Alliance, and Children's Alliance advocates for all 1.7 million children in Washington State. We've been in existence for 41 years, and we, along with lots of partners across the state, were responsible for getting the passage of the Fair Start for Kids Act in 2021. At that time, healthcare and childcare was decimated in the state, and this law was put into place to make investments in childcare, which is seen as a absolute essential, both for the children who get access to high quality childcare and are later on successful in K-12 and later on in life, as well as for restarting the economy, which during the pandemic was decimated, and without having a robust child care sector, there was no way that the Washington state economy would restart. The capital gains tax funded the Fair Start for Kids Act, and Children's Alliance has been instrumental both in its passage and in defense of it, as we will go through in your questions coming up.
So let's start on that note. What's your perspective on the concern that child care subsidies and some additional education funding will be out the window if the initiative passes? Are you concerned about that?
I think the issue here is that I think Mr. Blanford and the proponents of the capital gains tax think this is a problem of money. I really disagree with that. I think you look at the budget and how it's grown in Washington over the last, say, 15 years. In 2010, the general fund budget was $26 billion. It's $70 billion today. That's a 270% increase in the last 15 years. The population of Washington has only grown 15%. We need to understand how the money is being spent and if it's being spent efficiently. I really think it's not being spent efficiently. If you look at the cost of educating an average student in the public system versus the private system, it's $13,000 in the private system and $18,000 in the public system. That's a 40% difference. And I don't think anyone believes that kids in the public system are getting a superior education for that difference in cost, and they're not getting more teachers per student. So I think we really need to look at the efficiency here. I think the one thing that Mr. Blanford and I would agree on is that every student in Washington, every child in Washington deserves not just a good education, but a world-class education. The kids today are going to be dealing with things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality and self-driving cars and cryptocurrencies. We need a great STEM education for our kids, and they're not getting it. So I think we need to look at how we can improve our educational systems, and I really believe this is about incentives. We can talk about that. It's getting a little bit away from the conversation on the capital gains, because I think, you know, we can talk about how we can fix the educational system, but we also need to talk about the trade-offs with creating a capital gains tax. And that's one thing I don't think proponents of the capital gains tax have done, is to honestly talk about the trade-offs, because they're very, very important and massive trade-offs to our economy by having a capital gains tax.
If you could, Dr. Blanford, just give us your perspective on the argument that economic development in Washington is what it is, in part because there was not a tax like a capital gains tax, whereas many of the other competitors, especially in the tech sector, do have such a tax.
I look forward to that discussion, because I did some research, because I thought it was important to counter some of the arguments that have been made in the past on this particular issue. I think Vijay's argument is that if we put a capital gains tax in place, which it has been in place since 2021 and has raised in its first year $838 million that have funded early learning and K-12, that if that happens, then we'll lose tech sector workers and other people of wealth who are subject to the tax. I think it's important for your listeners to know that only 0.2% of all Washingtonians who pay taxes are actually subject to the capital gains tax. That's 0.2%, not 1%, not 2%, but 0.2%. So these are the wealthiest people in the state who are subject to this tax, and it is only 7% of the profits that they make when they sell their assets, not their houses, those are exempted, but stocks and bonds, where they gain, if they make over $250,000, then the first dollar over $250,000 is taxed at 7%. Vijay will make the argument that tech sector leaders will leave as a result of that. But there are ample studies out there that show that that is not the case. As a matter of fact, there's one study that came out recently that says for most workers who, or most people who can afford to move to other places, only 2.4% of them actually leave. There are only 8 states in the union that actually don't have a capital gains tax. They are Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, Tennessee, Texas, South Dakota, and Wyoming. And many of those states are actually considering having a capital gains tax as well, because it raises revenue to fund critical programs like education in Washington state. And so those arguments that people will leave in droves, including Jeff Bezos, those are specious arguments. Jeff Bezos was very clear when he announced that he was moving to Florida. He wanted to go and spend time with his family, and he wanted to spend time monitoring his investments in space. And he did not make a statement that he was leaving because of the tax burden. He was very clear that he was not leaving for that reason. And so some of the arguments that are being made are not arguments that are based in fact. They're based in worst case scenarios and trying to impress voters that you're going to have this mass exodus of taxpayers, which is not the case.
May I respond to that? I think there's 2 very critical points that Mr. Blanford brings up that I think need to be responded to. The first one is that people are leaving. I have friends who have left. I have several friends who have left and cite specifically the capital gains tax. Jeff Bezos may say one thing, that it's not because of the capital gains tax, but as soon as the capital gains tax was passed, he stopped selling Amazon stock. As soon as he landed in Florida, he started selling again. His actions betray his words. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is to think about, how did Amazon even come here? Look at Jeff Bezos' words. The reason he decided to come to Seattle was because of its business-friendly climate. Friendly at the time, not so friendly now, and because Washington had a very friendly tax policy. I would ask Mr. Blanford, would the people of Washington be better or worse off if Amazon was never founded here? If Jeff Bezos had said, actually, I want to found in Florida, and we're competing with Florida, we're competing with Texas. These states have very large inflows of people from places like California and New York, and it will start becoming Washington as well because of this tax. The other point I want to make is that this only affects 0.2% of the population. This is just a marketing gimmick. Within 1 year of passing this tax, people in the legislature who supported this have pushed new legislation to reduce the threshold from $250,000, which is where you start paying this tax, down to $15,000. This is going to apply to everyone who has stocks. And the people who are going to be harmed the most are the people in the tech sector who get a big chunk of their salary and their compensation in stock. So my point of view is, if you work in the tech sector, you should really consider the impact here. This is going to increase the capital gains burden on your stock sales by almost 50%. It's going to be a big impact. There are hundreds of thousands of people like this. And I was worried about this tax when it was passed, and I went into the Microsoft campus because I didn't know how people felt. And I asked people, what do you think of this tax? A lot of people didn't know about it, but the people who did said, actually, that's going to harm me a lot. I don't support that. I would repeal that. And I think what you're going to see is, even though traditionally the tech sector is fairly liberal, people realize that this tax is going to affect them. They've opened the door. They're marketing it as just for rich people, but they're already trying to lower the threshold so that this applies to basically everyone.
If you could respond to the argument that the threshold could be lowered, that other versions of the legislation, other bills have had lower limits, which some is, he referenced 15,000. I believe there was a $25,000 limit for one that was proposed. But also what impact that could have economically. Are you concerned that, I guess I'm asking you two questions to sort of respond to. One, do you think that it's likely the legislature will lower this tax if, for example, proceeds do not come in as planned, or lower the threshold rather? Or two, do you think that the economic impact of not having the next Amazon outweighs the potential benefits of the funding that the tax brings?
Well, I'd start off by saying that what we're talking about is on the ballot. The language has already been produced, and what is very clear is that what's on the ballot is an initiative to get rid of the capital gains tax. I'm not going to argue because I do not know what the plans are. I think Vijay is using a play from the playbook that Tim Eyman uses, which is to look at a law or a policy that is in place and extrapolate all these terrible outcomes. The voters of Washington State have the capital gains tax in front of them. 0.2% of Washingtonians actually have to pay that tax. I hope that we will get into a conversation about who benefits from the tax, who benefits from which children and what parts of the state they benefit, because I can share numbers about significant impacts that come from the tax. And I think it's important to note the fact that this is a tax break for millionaires and billionaires in Washington State at the cost of low-income people and middle-income people and their children. Because it is very clear, we can go through the numbers and I'll be happy to share.
Go ahead.
So, for example, in Adams County, as a result of this tax, there are 59 kids who are in child care right now that would not be in child care as a result of the tax. The amount of grants that have been given in that area, in that county, are $50,000, and $943,000 has been going into subsidies that provide for child care in that county. We could look at any county in Washington State because millions of dollars have already started to benefit schools and child care centers across the counties. And for every county, we're happy to share this data, it is abundantly clear that it's already benefiting children and families at the cost of the 0.2% of Washingtonians who are the wealthiest Washingtonians that you can imagine and are subject to a tax that is only 7%. I did a little bit of research to find out that since the pandemic, those same wealthiest Washingtonians, on average, increased their wealth 40% since the start of the pandemic. They have enough money, there is no doubt about it, and they have some obligation to pay their fair share so that all the children in Washington State have a chance to reach their potential.
If you could respond to the specifically, I want to ask too, the claim, the idea that, you know, people are sort of getting a pass, the extremely high earners or extremely high investment portfolio owning individuals are the ones who are paying this tax, which is going to people who really can't afford childcare without some help.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. This is not a tax on being wealthy. This is a tax on becoming wealthy. This is a tax for people who come here and find success. They work at a tech company or they start a company themselves or a small business and they build it out over many years and they have a financial success. People like Bill Gates, there are easy ways that you can avoid capital gains by borrowing against your stock and not actually creating any capital gains, and that's what a lot of ultra wealthy people do. But this is really going to affect people who have one of those one-time wealth events, which is really important to them and their family. They found a company, say, and they work at it for 10 years and it's worth $5 million. That's a big wealth event for their family, and they're going to make the calculation, should I stay here or should I go somewhere else like Florida? And on the other end, we're going to have people who are looking at Washington, people like Bezos back in the 90s saying, should I go to Washington? Is it going to be an attractive place to start a business? Will I get to keep the fruits of my labor? And it's just really a big misconception. Firstly, that this is only going to, the ultra wealthy can avoid this anyway. This is affecting people who, like me, I came to this country with nothing, no money at all. I came here and I had a great success, and it made a big impact to my life and my family. For people like me in the tech sector who have these great events, it's going to be a big, big impact. The other thing I'd like to respond to is it's not fear-mongering to say that this tax is going to apply to other people. I would like viewers to look up the piece of legislation, SB 5335, which was introduced, which will lower the threshold from $250,000 down to $15,000. There is a strong intent here to expand the base here. You look at the history of the people who are proposing this tax, they always wanted an income tax in this state. They tried 7 times with initiatives to pass an income tax, and the people of Washington kept striking it down. The legislature went behind the people and did this without their approval. So I think people are going to strike this down again, because we've had that long history of not having an income tax. And you can see from the intent from the a piece of legislation that I cited, SB 5335, that they are trying to make this apply to everyone, and it will. And to think that this is not going to expand, like, which tax program in history has not expanded? The US federal income tax started as a 1% tax on a very small handful of people. We all pay that tax. Everyone in Washington who has stocks or has assets is going to be paying this tax in a few years.
And so, well, we're running low on time, so at this point we're going to transition to closing arguments here. If you could, since you started, I'll ask you to go first, Vijay, in 60 seconds or less if you can.
Thank you. So I believe that this tax is going to be extremely harmful for our economy. It's going to disincentivize people to come to Washington and form businesses here. Actually, the American Center for Progress has a study recently that since this tax was passed, we have the lowest rate of growth of businesses in the whole country. This is already having an impact. It's being falsely marketed as a tax on rich, but they're already trying to expand this tax to everybody. Yes, our kids deserve a great education. I agree with that. I have 4 young children. I deeply care about the kids in Washington and our education system, but our money is being badly mismanaged. Kids in private school, the average cost of their education is $13,000. The cost of public education is $18,000. Parents are fleeing the public education system because they're not getting a good product. There are ways to solve this, and in fact, there are ways to tax the rich that don't hurt the economy, which I would support. We could have a luxury tax on things like McMansions and jets and yachts. That's fine, but this tax is going to have a massive detrimental effect on our economy. We need to vote yes on Initiative 2109, and we need to repeal the capital gains tax and make Washington a place where we don't punish success and we welcome America's best and brightest.
And closing remarks, if you could.
I didn't get a chance to share some of the data on the communities all around Washington State that benefit from the tax. I think it is important for voters and for your listeners to be able to go to known2109.com or .org, and you will find all kinds of information on how it is already benefiting children and families in Washington State. It's important for voters also to know that this is a tax break for the wealthiest individuals in Washington State, the 0.2% of Washingtonians who are subject to the tax, to the benefit of all of the people who stand to gain from having a tax that funds education, that funds child care, that ensures that women have a place to send their children when they go back to work. And so for lots of different reasons, and the tax already exists. So it's important, if you are supportive of continuing the investment, that you vote no on the initiative, and so that we can continue to go forward and not go back, as Vijay would have us do.
We will have to leave it there. Thank you both very much for your time and your perspective. We do appreciate it. Well, we're out of time, but we hope you'll join us again next week for more in-depth interviews you won't find anywhere else. Have a great week.